Welcome to Unit 8, Section 2, The Rise of Russia. Last time we talked a lot about the Byzantine Empire and how it rose, maintained, and then eventually declined. Today we're going to be talking about how the Byzantine Empire, amongst other empires, influenced the Russians and what we look at as modern day Russia today. We're also going to be looking at the Mongol conquest as well as the different groups that come in and how Russia starts to take on its own identity after the Mongols. So we'll be looking at that today. We'll be jumping around a lot with dates, but our objectives are going to be as follows. Again, we have no focus question. This unit is too short really to have a focus question. Okay, but objective 1, what is the basic geography of Russia? Russia is pretty easy to find on a map. If you can't find Russia, then you really need to spend a little bit more time with a map. But also Russia is just gigantic. So we'll be talking just a little bit about Russia and its geography. Objective 2, how did the Mongols influence Russia? We'll be talking about the Mongols and how even the modern day ruling of Russia today has been influenced by this great group of people. And then we'll also be looking at objective 3, what were the achievements of Ivan the Great? And we'll even talk about his grandson, Ivan the Terrible, who was pretty terrible. Now, in history, not always, but pretty much always, when somebody has the name so-and-so the Great, like Ivan the Great, they really probably did something that was pretty great. Not just anybody was called great. And vice versa. If you're called Ivan the Terrible, there's probably good reason why you were called terrible. You probably did something that was pretty bad, okay? So those are good rules of thumb to look at in history. So we're going to skip past this essential question as well. We could look at and say, like, why do we call Russia the Third Rome? And I think it'll be pretty clear, but I don't really think we need to ask this question and answer this question. Okay, so I like this map a lot of Russia because it shows the sheer size of it. If you look here, here is where, this is Germany, and this is generally where we would split. We would say Germany is generally part of Western Europe, but Poland, Ukraine, Hungary, Belarus, and Latvia, Lithuania, all these other countries, we would generally call Eastern Europe. So starting in Eastern Europe, we start to see Russia going down towards Asia Minor by the Black Sea. So Constantinople would be like right over here. And then like Jerusalem and stuff would be like down here. Okay. And so Russia starts here. Okay. And it crosses all the way through Asia Minor. So this would be like, as you see on the map here, you have all the stands like Tajikistan, and there's Georgia and Kazakhstan and all these other stands, right? And we keep going past and we get clear over to China. So it is ginormous how huge it is. I mean, it's just huge. And it also goes really high up. This is the Bering Strait. And this might be a little confusing to people because you don't see this map usually a lot of times. But guess what this is right here? This is Alaska. This is the United States. And so people actually literally swim across the Bering Strait sometimes. It's not that far of a distance. Okay. I think it might be 90 miles. I'm not sure. But this is a pretty close area right here. And so you can see how not only does Russia extend clear across most of Europe, Asia Minor, and Asia, but it also goes really high up north and quite a bit far down south. It's a just gigantic area of land. Now, one thing that we'll look at though here is a big part of it is what we call Siberia, and not very many people live in this area because it's not that it's not necessarily uninhabitable, but it's not really where you want to live. It's mostly tundra. It's really, really harsh conditions there. There are people that live in Siberia, but it's not a place that you really want to build a lot of great cities and other things like that. This is where most of the people live in Russia. Moscow, St. Petersburg, these are places you've probably even heard of. And it's more on this western side of Russia. And then there's, if you look at a map of population, almost all of it is right here. Okay, so let's look at another map of Russia. Again, to show you, so here is, if we come down, this would be like Turkey. This would be like modern day Iran. So you go clear over from here, which would be like if you kept going down, this would be Turkey, Iraq, and then coming down farther, we'd go down to like Saudi Arabia and eventually like Jerusalem and all that kind of stuff. We go from there and we cross clear across Asia Minor into Asia and over to the Pacific Ocean. It's humongous. This is China. This is all sorts of different countries, and Russia is it's just a huge chunk of land. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about the geography of Russia. Number one, Russia lies on the area of land called Eurasia. Hopefully you've heard that word before. If you haven't, that's okay. Eurasia, just think about it for a second. Eurasia. So it's Asia and Europe combined. It's the just gigantic landmass of all of Europe and all of Russia together, okay? And we call it Eurasia because it is Europe and Asia. And these cultures are very different. Europe and Asia are. You go to England or France, and you don't really expect to know or see much Asian influence there. Now there is, don't get me wrong, but you'll see that a lot more in Russia, which is a lot closer. Okay, and so Russia lies on this huge area of land that has a lot of different cultures and a lot of different people on it. Russia's is geographically an ideal place for transportation and trading. Why? Because it has a lot of water routes to it. It's got a tremendous amount of abilities, harbors, and other places where people can come and ship things into the country, and also people can ship things out. So it's really big that way. Russia is pretty cold area. It's not always, not everywhere, and not all year, but parts of it are all year cold, and then other parts are cold only for a portion of time. Surrounded by water, and none of the water is warm. It's all cold, but it still allows you to have a lot of trading. And today, Russia still can do a lot of trading because of this. It does have some really nice forests, some very deep and very plush forests, and it has some grasslands. And in the grasslands, there's a lot of grasslands in Siberia. The grasslands are just so stinking cold in that kind of tundra that it doesn't grow tons and tons of grass. But there are herdsmen and nomads that live in Siberia, and they have their livestock just feed in that area. So it definitely has a lot of different geographical characteristics. So here is what we call the steppes. This is more of that grassland we're talking about. So here's Siberia. There is grassland, like I said, here, but it's mostly tundra and a lot of nomads and stuff like that. Not a lot of nomads, but nomads live here. The grasslands that more of the other rich livestock live in is this area right here. And it's because it doesn't have to be hit as bad with weather storms. It's sitting closer down, so it has a lot more warmth to it, which allows it to have seasons and everything else. Okay, so let's talk about Kiev. Kiev is a pretty important place as far as Russia goes. If you watch modern day news at all, you'll know this as well. So during Roman times, the Slavs expanded into southern Russia, and they organized into clans. This shouldn't be surprising. Like we've talked about Germanic tribes and different groups, and the Slavs are no different. They're just a group that divides into these clans, but they're primarily based in southern Russia. Okay. And they're going to be called the Varangians. Okay, the Varangians is really, you might know them by a different name, called the Vikings. And the Russians called them Varangians. And they were very skilled sailors and traders. And you might know this already. You probably do if you know anything about Viking culture and stuff. Okay, so this is one of the early groups in this area of Russia. Okay, the city of Kiev is a major city and trading route. Now, I want to look back at one of these maps here for a second, just so you can understand where Kiev is. So here's Kiev right here. Here's Moscow. Okay, give you a better picture of this here. Here's Kiev right here. So if we looked at a modern day map of Kiev, you would notice something kind of interesting. Think about it. Where is Kiev? Kiev is not in Russia today. Kiev is actually in Ukraine. But we call this area all part of Russia. And this is why Russia, if you watch the news at all, Russia has pushed in and taken areas of Ukraine's land within the last 8 years quite a bit. So this is an example of This being at this time, this is all Russian, and it's also why the Russians feel almost entitled to this because it's part of their history and has been for a long, long time. Okay, they're very interconnected. But I wanted you guys to understand and see that Kiev is not today is not part of Russia. Okay, the city of Kiev was the major trading route where Varangians or other people would come and they would change and would trade different goods. It's going to grow because of that. Any kind of commercial center is going to make it very, very successful and grow a lot. Okay. And because of this, we see the Byzantines, who we talked about last time, really do a lot of trading in Kiev. Now, you'll remember Constantinople is really kind of the center of Asian trading, Asian to Europe trading. So all of the stuff coming from Asia gets into Constantinople, and then Constantinople goes north and starts trading stuff through Kiev. And because of that, we see a huge amount of Byzantine cultural influences. Let me give you a couple examples. Number one, hopefully, I don't know if these guys will look familiar, but maybe even in the back here, we call these icons. Remember that from section 1? These are icons of different saints or different people. And these are priests and patriarchs. And here is the patriarch, the benevolent. And he is doing, I don't know if it's at Mass or what he's doing, but this is the Eastern Orthodox Church. Now in Russia, they'll call this the Russian Orthodox Church, which is like a break off, but it's pretty much the same exact church. Okay. And this is an example of the influence that the Byzantines had with the Russians. Also look at the buildings. It's amazing to me to look at some of these buildings here. You can see total Byzantine architectural styles here, but you can also see other ones. Look at this. This looks so Persian and so Turkish and even Indian, right? You can see with the big old domes here with the crosses, right? All this looks so, it is. So my point here is that you can see a lot of, in big cities where you have a lot of trading going, you're going to see a lot of multicultural architecture and just multicultural influences in buildings and religion and language and all sorts of things. Okay, look at this early Byzantine Orthodox church here. Look at all the icons again, right? These are early time period in this church. Again, you can see there's a ton of influence on these cultures. We looked at the alphabet last time, the Cyrillic alphabet, and I like this one even more because it shows a little bit better, I think, in English, kind of what you can see the relationship between the Byzantine and the Russians. Okay, there's some major differences, but there are also some major similarities as well. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about Kiev and a little bit more about the history of this area. First off, we're going to talk about a guy named Vladimir. Vladimir spread Christianity further and further and further, and so he kind of has this good image as he is seen as the man who spread Christianity into Russia. You can kind of think of him as like the Charlemagne of Russia. Charlemagne was the one that spread and unified Christianity in Western Europe, and so is Vladimir here. Okay. In Byzantine Christianity, he's going to set up this pattern of his church and the state. He's going to have a very close interconnection between, again, government and religion, and eventually the Russian leaders they're going to control the church as well. This might seem familiar because you'll see that, like, remember, if you looked at Byzantine culture, that's exactly how it was. The Russians are going to do the same thing. It will be a little bit different in that the Russians will have a little bit more of an intricate role into it, but they are going to have a pretty hefty influence on the church there. Okay. Now, we're also talking about a guy named Yaroslav. Now, Kiev enjoyed what we call the Golden Age under a man called Yaroslav the Wise. Now, Yaroslav the Wise, again, anytime they add something like the Great, the Terrible, the Wise, it really means they did something good or bad or whatever they're known for. But Yaroslav is known for some great things, and wisdom specifically. Number one, he issued written laws to improve justice. So he takes the same example from the Byzantines, from the Romans, and he's going to apply it to his own culture and codify the laws so that way everybody knows exactly what the laws are. Kiev is going to decline in the 12th century as rival families are going to start coming and battling for the throne. This is going to allow one group to come in because of the weakness going on in Russia and is going to allow them to come in and take over. And that's going to be the Mongols. The Russians or the people in Kiev are not going to be strong enough to fight off because they've been so busy fighting with each other. They're not unified. They don't have the supplies, the soldiers. They are not ready for the Mongols, who are crazy when it comes to war. So if you look here, this is the Mongol Empire before 1259. And if you look at the red lines, these are campaigns under the great Genghis Khan. Okay. And then these other ones in blue are going to be the campaigns of his later successors. The Mongols are just crazy. They defy all historical lessons. They just came in and they took over everything. Absolutely ruthless when it came to war. Took over what they wanted, killed anyone that got in their way, and defeated against all odds groups that they never should have been able to defeat. So the Mongols really are a pretty interesting and pretty astounding group. So in 1200, the young leader Genghis Khan united all the nomadic Mongols in Central Asia. So instead of fighting with them, he unified them all. Now, part of that unification was saying to them, you either join me or I'll kill you. But he'll get them all unified. And because of this, they're going to decide that they can go out and that they can conquer other groups. And again, they're known for their absolute fierceness when fighting. People will be terrified of the Mongols. But what's interesting is when the Mongols took over finally, they were actually fairly tolerant rulers, meaning they didn't really care. They were kind of like practicing what the Persians did, if you remember, tolerance. But it wasn't so much that they tolerated or respected these other groups. They just wanted really one thing. The Mongols demanded that they be paid on a regular basis as tribute as a conquered people. It was almost like a tax to recognize that the Mongols were better than you. So we want money because we're better than you, and we want you to admit we're better than you. Reality, they're wanting money to fuel their own economic abilities and their own military advances towards other civilizations. But Genghis Khan is going to be one fierce, fierce leader. And as long as you pay your tribute, they'll pretty much leave you alone. You just have to pay your tribute. Okay, so we already looked at that picture before. I don't really want to go into a lot of detail here. But Genghis Khan is going to have some major successes into Europe and Asia and Russia. Now, again, the peasants were feeling heavy burdens because of taxes. And this is an example of a group that comes in and conquers another group. And instead of being upset, they kind of actually are okay with it. Because if you were a peasant living in Kiev or in Russia, and you have these lords or these kings who are fighting all the time, they need money in order to keep fighting. So they continue to have huge taxes on the peasants. The peasants are really feeling this. When the Mongols come in, it brought peace to the land. There was no more fighting because it was all under Mongols. The Mongols owned and ruled everything. If they got out of hand, they'd had to answer to Genghis Khan himself. And so this is going to make, yes, still taxes on the peasants, but not nearly as much as what they were paying before. So a lot of people are okay under Mongol influence for this reason. Eventually, the Mongol Empire, though, like all empires, is going to start to decline. And the princes of Moscow, who were under Mongol rule, are going to start taking their own role, and they're going to really feel a sense of patriotism because they are the ones from that area, from Moscow, from Kiev, from Russia, and they feel pride for their home, just like you and me do. By being an American, we feel pride for our country, right? They're going to feel the same way, and they're going to want to defend Russia against other people like the Mongols or anyone else. By 1380, the Russians are going to defeat what's called the Golden Horde. The Golden Horde is the Mongols. It's the Mongol army, okay? And so they're going to defeat them in 1380. And this is going to allow Moscow to be able to start its own empire, its own civilization, which is great because the people living there will be happy because they will feel like they are finally getting their own culture represented. So Moscow's going to take the lead. And one of their first leaders is Ivan the Great. And again, he's called the Great because he must have done some pretty important things. Since this is one of your objectives, let's make sure we pay attention to what he does. Number one, Ivan III, or known as Ivan the Great, lived from 1463 to 1505. And he freed the Russians from the Mongols. And so that's number one. You got to love somebody that frees you from a group of other people. We love George Washington. He freed us from the English. If you are any group that gets freed from another group, that leader is going to almost always be famous for that reason. So Ivan the Great is famous, one, because he got rid of the Mongols. Also, he's going to build an absolute framework for absolute rule. We talked about Justinian and being an autocrat. Ivan the Great will be very much the same way. He will have absolute control over everything. Now, he does limit his powers by creating what's called boyars, or the great landowning nobles. This is going to hopefully sound familiar like feudalism, because it's very similar to feudalism. Ivan and his successors, they started to take the name Tsar. And I'm sorry that's not written down here, like you can't see past that. But the word Tsar actually is one that should be familiar for a couple reasons. Number one, you might remember the great story of Anastasia and her being lost. And her father was Nicholas, who was a Tsar of Russia, right? So you might remember that because you've heard that word before, Tsar, from that story. But also, and hopefully even more, if you take the word Tsar, it actually comes from the word Caesar. Caesar in the Roman Empire, right, was the leader. He was the king, if you want to call him that. He was Caesar. And so the Tsar is actually just the Russian word for the word Caesar. So who are the Russians thinking that they are trying to model themselves after? Who are the Russians trying to look like? It's going to try to be like the Romans. And where are they going to get most of that? Because they're pretty far away from Western Rome. So where are they getting most of this influence from? It's the Eastern Empire of the Roman Empire, Constantinople, the Byzantine Empire. Okay? And so the Tsar is going to have tremendous power because of this. And Ivan the Third, or Ivan the Great, is the one that really established this. Here's a great picture of Ivan the Great. Okay? Now, Genghis Khan, or the Great Khan leader, it's not Genghis actually at this time, is going to say, we need more money. We need more tribute. And instead of Ivan the Great saying, you know what, okay, fine, just here's your money, go away, we don't want to see you again, he rips up the letter that the Khan had sent him, which is huge, because this is instantly offensive and is going to be fighting words for sure. And so this makes Ivan almost heroic, because he does this great, brave thing to do, tearing up the letter in front of the Khan's servants who brought the letter. These Russian boyars, with Ivan the Great, will come together and will try to decide what they're going to do with the Mongols. And Ivan the Great says and decides that 100% they need to be unified, and unified under him. So one difference between this and feudalism is feudalism will have a little bit more freedom between the ruler and the vassals, or the minor lords, where in these examples, especially under Ivan the Great, he will have tremendous power, and he'll demand that these nobles follow him and that they follow him, just link step, that they're always following exactly what he's asking them to do. So Ivan is going to eventually pass away, but he'll be known mostly for his ability to have gotten rid of the Mongols. That's his great thing. He also establishes society better. He makes laws and institutes those laws. He's a very, very strong leader. Well, unfortunately, his grandson will be named after him, but instead of being named Ivan the Great, he'll be called Ivan the Terrible. Now, let's not give any prejudices at first. Why is he terrible? And you'll have to decide if you think he was or not. Okay, just like you have to decide if Ivan really was great or not. But Ivan, who is the fourth, the grandson of the Ivan the Great, is going to take his power and he's going to make it even more complete. So he's going to take more and more power away from the boyars, and he's going to put it more towards him, more than his grandfather had before. He's going to introduce new laws that are going to tie the Russian serfs to the land, which is going to be a big deal, because as we talked in medieval Europe, serfs had been part of the land, and that was fine in feudal contracts when there was no middle class. It'd be better to be a serf and work the land but have guarantee of food and guarantee of protection than not. But here we don't have that. We don't have the culture People had not been tied to the land like that before. And two, we have an emerging middle class. People do not like this at all. But Ivan does it not because he wants to be a jerk, but because he wants to make his boyars happy. He wants to give them more free labor, essentially. He's also going to establish, and usually anytime a ruler does this, you almost always know they're bad. Hitler does this, Stalin does this. I mean, pretty much any bad dictator ever did this. And Ivan the Terrible is no different. He establishes a secret police. Secret police is used to spy on people. It's used to hide, and so you can catch your enemies doing things that they wouldn't otherwise do because they don't think anyone's around. And so he has this secret police going out and looking for his enemies to get rid of them. By 1516, Ivan became completely crazy. He was losing his mind, and he had a horrible, horrible temper, which he could not control. The Tsar's power and the ways he used his power are what gave him the name Ivan the Terrible. And again, you'll have to look at some of his actions. Ivan's going to die in 1584, and he'll leave his land, and basically it creates a total open rebellion. There's no clear direction who's in charge. Well, it is his son. His youngest son will be in charge. His son is weak. By this point, people are upset. They're fighting, and he really can't control his grandson. He really can't control like his great-grandfather had done. And so this is going to be a major problem for him. So here's some things that make Ivan pretty terrible. Number one, Ivan beat his pregnant daughter-in-law so badly that she caused a miscarriage, okay? And he did it because he thought she was being immodest. So instead of saying, hey, you should probably put more clothes on, or you should be more modest or whatever, he just flew out the handle and just beat her until she almost died. Ivan's son is going to learn about this, and when he hears it, he's going to say, Father, you're a piece of garbage. How could you hit my wife who's pregnant and cause this miscarriage? I mean, right? If this happened to me, pretty sure my father-in-law would be dead. So you can understand where Ivan's son comes in. He's pretty upset, right? And they're having this heated argument, and Ivan's dad takes out and strikes his son in the head with a pointed staff. Now, there's all sorts of rumors about this, but eventually it's going to cause his death, and people are going to call this accidental. Okay, now rather Ivan just was so non in control of his temper that he accidentally killed his son, or if he did it purposely. Either way, the man had some major issues when it came to his temper. Okay, so let's look at it. He killed his son. He accused of poisoning his wife eventually, and he allowed his younger son to take the throne. But at his younger son, he's not going to have much success after Ivan the Terrible. And so I think Ivan the Terrible is named adequately the Terrible for those reasons. So let's just finish off here with Moscow taking the lead. There's going to be some major disputes over secession, peasants uprising, and foreign invasions. Without a strong leader like Ivan the Great, and with the terrible leadership of Ivan the Terrible and now his grandson, it is going to just sink into total despair. And this is going to be called the Troubled Times. It's going to last from about 1604 to 1613. And really, this is going to be kind of the end of Russia at this time in this way. Eventually, we'll get czars back in control. They will have control over Russia again. And well until World War I, at the very end of mid to end of World War I, when this communists take over Russia. This is going to have a tremendous impact on Russian history. So you can see how important Russia gets its legacy from its leaders. Sorry about that. So let's look at our objectives again. What is the basic geography of Russia? We talked about that. That's going to be that it lies on Eurasia, that it's gigantic, that it's surrounded by cold water, but it has a lot of different cold harbors, that it is cold itself, that has grassland, that has forests, but also has the tundra of Siberia. All of those things would be included with geography. Okay. How did the Mongols influence Russia? Well, they're going to create a lot of the almost feudal system. They're going to have tolerance. They're going to allow them to kind of do what they want as long as they pay tribute. And that's going to have a pretty big impact on the Russians as well. Okay. Then objective 3, what were the achievements of Ivan the Great? Ivan the Great is the one who is going to get rid of the Mongols He's going to be the one, that's his biggest achievement. He gets rid of the Mongols. He also is going to institute laws and codes and everything else like that. But the thing that's most important is that he gets rid of the Mongols from Russia. Okay, so that is the end. I hope that helps you guys. We don't really spend enough time on these cultures here, Russia and the Byzantine Empire, but it's at least we talk about it to some degree, and we really should go into more detail about it because these two cultures are tremendously influential and very important to our history today. Thanks so much. Bye.